We are often the ones who are going to get into the point where we just tell people that they'll figure it out, or that it's not a big deal, or we use scripture and twist it into a very hurtful, abusive situation, where it's maybe obey your husband in some way if scripture's twisted in that direction, among many other ways. There are a lot of real life stories of people who have been damaged by the church when it comes to topics of abuse. For example, there's a guy named Jim who tried to basically turn his wife into a prostitute. And eventually, they were both going to church the whole time. But eventually, the wife started to explain to the church that this is what's happening to her. And the church didn't know how to respond. They didn't take her seriously. And they just encouraged her to be loyal to her husband, which was the last advice that she should have been given. We have been preaching through Jesus. Always a good thing for your churches to be focused on. But we've been specifically going through the Sermon on the Mount. But right now we're kind of in a series on Jesus because I feel like the world has a lot of ways of doing church, but we don't always ground ourselves in the identity of who Jesus was and is. And we as Christians, sometimes known as little Christs, are supposed to look like him, supposed to act like him, supposed to understand what he's like so that we could be like him. So Sermon on the Mount is one of Jesus's, it's pretty much the greatest message ever preached throughout history. It's withstood time even into today as great literature. And before we get into today's passage, which will be all the way at the end of today's message, so when you're like, oh no, he's just getting started, it's been half an hour, don't worry, we're at the end, you've made it, congratulations. But we're going to start somewhere else first. Because I think Jesus' teachings, as I mentioned last week, he sometimes embellishes and says things in an extreme-like manner to get your attention, to jolt you awake. But then if you were to sit down and speak with him on the same matter, you would get not only a compassionate kind of Jesus, but you would also get a Jesus who has more to say than just the one extreme thing that he said. This is how good teachers work. We speak strongly, powerfully, prophetically, but then Jesus, the pastor, meeting with people one-on-one is going to come from a different kind of angle. I want to start off by talking about my friend Chloe. Chloe was with us for a while before and it's not her real name, before you think of, oh, I know who that is. It's not that Chloe, just in case you know a Chloe who's been here before. But Chloe was with us for a while, and then when the pandemic hit, Chloe vanished, along with 100 other people that we were serving at the time. And the next time that I heard from them, they had been broken up with their boyfriend, who had been emotionally abusive to them. And they had then hooked up with another person who ended up also being abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, pretty much all the forms of abuse. And it was probably the first time that I found myself in the world of someone facing abuse to the level of which she was. Like, these were not just little emotional snips or anything like that. I would get calls in very desperate situations. So, for example, there was a time where she needed me to send some money because she had driven all the way to Ypsilanti to give her plasma. But along the way, she had taken her abusive boyfriend in attempts to try to help him also be able to give his plasma. She did it feeling like this was the right way to take care of them. And along the way, he beat her, left her head bloody, and broke the skin. And now she could not give plasma, did not have enough money to come back. And he just took up and ran. And so she's stranded in Ypsilanti. She's bleeding. Don't know if she has a concussion. Don't know if she should be at the hospital. Out of her own hope to help this guy, she found herself back in a horrible situation. That is just one example of tons that happened over time. That time and time again, she would tell me about the ways that this guy was hurting her, trying to kill her. She eventually got him put in prison, and as soon as he came out, he came for her. It was over and over and over again, this abusive situation that she felt stuck in. She did not even want to be in it. There were times where she was clear-headed enough to be like, I got to get out of this. But even jail could not hold him back. And so we met over and over again, trying to sort it out. I gave her the space time and time again. You owe nothing to this person. Get out of this. But when you're dealing with abuse, you have to trust that the person who's going through the abuse knows what to do best, and you can give your best recommendations. But they'll often have to figure out in their own way what makes the most sense. So there's different kinds of abuse, and Chloe, in many ways, faced them all. She was the mother of several children that were all anywhere from like 1 to college aged. And if she would get a job, she would go out and start working it. It would go well for a while, and then the abusive boyfriend would break in and screw up the job, and then they'd fire her because he set off some emergency system at the work or something like that. So time and time again, he would find himself getting into her life to destroy it from every angle. She was physically abused, she was emotionally abused, likely sexually abused, though we didn't talk about that, and economically abused. In every different way that she tried to get free, it seemed like she couldn't. It felt like she was stuck. And a lot of people will be like, well, why don't you just get out of those situations? But when you are being abused from every single angle, sometimes you just don't know what to do anymore. And there have been studies done on animals, and it's a pretty horrible study I read about once in which dogs were more or less just abused to the point like if the cage was open, they wouldn't even leave because it was too scary to leave the cage because of the things that had happened before. And even if the scientists were not to do anything, they were done. They were out. It's a broken spirit, and the Bible talks quite a bit about that. When we get to these places where our spirit is so broken that it's hard to walk in freedom. It's hard to trust what might be on the other end when things have gone so badly over and over again. And people are often quick to point fingers at people who are in abuse and say, you just get out. Why did you end up in that in the first place? What were you thinking? But it's not that simple. The characteristics of abusers are actually quite disturbing because much of their hope is to fit in without you noticing. They're often controlling, they're possessive, they're entitled, they're justified, they feel. They're manipulative, they disrespect their partner and consider themselves superior. They strive to have a good public image, they deny and minimize their abuse, and they confuse love and abuse together. So abusers will often be living in this way, but they do it kind of behind closed doors. When they feel that they have been caught, there's often something that goes off on them, and then they start to show the signs that they were hiding so well before. But they're often clever. They hide behind the image. And I've run into this before where you would not have been able to tell, but then when sitting with people in some inner healing sessions and they're telling me what's going on, both their mind is blown when I reveal to them that, hey, are you aware that this is abuse? And my mind is blown when there are people that I know where I'm like, wow, that is abusive behavior. I would have never expected this behind closed doors. And so you have to learn to kind of identify that so that you can help people who's dealing with it. There are different patterns of abuse, but there's one lady who's been through it before, and she kind of wrote a lot and spoke on this topic. In her own story, she had gotten married to this guy, and then she quit her high-level job for him, and then they moved out into the middle of nowhere, and then the guy flipped the script and suddenly became abusive. And she talks about the kinds of things that she started to see as patterns of abuse. Number one, first they charm. Number two, then they isolate. Number three, they threaten. And then number four, it can end with murder. Because it can get that out of control. And when you hear some of these stories, like you'll hear people come and say like, oh, well, my husband maybe pulled out a gun on me once. It's like, that is one time too many. This is not what marriage is supposed to look like. That has well crossed the line of what marriage is ever allowed to look like. And this particular woman, after she saw these patterns of abuse, her own way out, and it's different for everyone. We have places in Jackson, by the way, that will help if you're dealing with abuse. We have the Aware Shelter in town, among some other ministries. But her way out was to just announce it to the world. She started telling anyone and everyone, strangers and people she knew, just letting everyone know I am in an abusive relationship. And eventually that became so hard for her abuser to hide that she was able to get free of the situation. But just because that worked for her does not always mean that that's the easiest thing for everybody else. When people are stuck in abusive situations, a lot of times people will tell them just to report it, but there's many reasons in which they're not going to do that. Sometimes they believe or hope that the abuse is eventually going to end, even though it often doesn't. There's a make-up period after the violence that sometimes reassures them and strengthens their emotional bond with their partner. Like it plays with your mind, like, okay, they just had a weird moment, we're fine now. It's this back and forth kind of emotional roller coaster. Victims sometimes depend on their partner. So the partner pays the bills, takes care of them, things like that, and they feel like they have to be in that relationship. Sometimes they fear that if they say something, that their partner will become even more violent, or if they leave, they'll become more violent. They fear for the safety of their children and their other loved ones. They fear that the children will be taken into government care, which can happen. And they fear of losing their home. And so they're not just up against nothing. That's not even the end of the list. They fear for the safety of their pets, their farm animals, fear that no one will believe that their abuse happened, which is a thing that I've seen a lot of people run into. In fact, when I've been doing deliverance ministry, when I've forced the demons to say their lies about like what they're telling the person, because we have to break those lies to get the demons out. There's been times where the demons have been like, I have been telling them that no one will believe them. What's unfortunate is that the church often plays right into that when people say what's happening in their lives. We come alongside and we're like, well, that's not happening, which gives the demons lots of energy, like, yes, they played right into the trap. They did exactly what we hoped they would do. They also don't report because they're isolated from family and friends. Part of the abuse may have been to ensure that they're isolated. They do not feel that they have the support they need. They fear of being deported or losing their immigration status. They do not know about their rights or what's available to them. They fear the legal system. They feel pressure from their family or friends to stay. They feel pressure or blame from their community. They live in a rural area with few services and supports available. They live in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. And they don't want to bring shame to their families. They want to save face. This is a whole list of those who have worked in this field for a long time, what they have seen when it comes to people trying to get free of abuse, but they're afraid to report it. And this isn't like a small deal. Like if I'm going to run into it just in a small church serving the community, then you're going to run into it somewhere, whether you've noticed it or not. Statistics say that we actually, and there's a lot of varied statistics, tried to go with some that were a little balanced here. As many as 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men are victims of domestic violence. I have met men who have undergone abuse. I have met women who have undergone abuse. From 1994 to 2010, approximately 4 in 5 victims of intimate partner violence were female. So we do often see that it fits into the subject that we usually think, that men are usually the oppressors. Not always, but usually. And in the U.S., 3 women are murdered every day by boyfriends, exes, or husbands, which are the last people that you should be expecting you would bump into that kind of stuff from, right? And so you can imagine when you do bump into it, just how confusing it can be for you. And so when you do bump into it, there's kind of 4 best practices that you can try. Number 1, trust the victim. Trust the victim. I understand that there are people out there who will lie about abuse. You do not choose the small percentage of people lying and push everyone who is real, the majority, out the window. Just because you met one person one time who lied about abuse does not mean that the other 99% who are telling you the truth are no longer valid. And that's true on any issue that we face, right? So trust the victim. If someone comes to talk to you about abuse, your first job is to stop and trust them. Remember, the abusers do their best to mask this, so it's going to be jarring to you at first. Like, no, I know that person. There's no way. But if you trust them, you might see that there is a way. Number 2, choose your words carefully, the way that you respond. People are going to remember the way that you respond because it takes a lot of courage to open up in the first place. If the way that you respond is belittling, that's going to freeze them up from being able to talk about this to anyone else. And then you need to take care of yourself. Sometimes when you're dealing with people who are going through abuse, their load is very, very heavy, and you also are now entering into the conversation, but it can get out of control. The person that I know who's been dealing with it, like in the ways in which I have tried to help them, has taken a lot of time, energy, and money, thousands of dollars over time to try to help them out. And so you do have to figure out when you are helping others who are dealing with abuse, like where the lines are for you as you engage to try to help them find freedom. And then ask questions. Ask questions. People need to be able to respond to what's going on, but it's better to just kind of bring questions so you can bring out the information that you're looking for. And that also shows them that you are listening and you are interested and you do want to know more so you can figure out how to help. Unfortunately, the church is notorious for having done a really bad job when it comes to conversations of abuse. We are often the ones who are going to get into the point where we just tell people that they'll figure it out or that it's not a big deal, or we use scripture and twist it into a very hurtful, abusive situation, whereas maybe obey your husband in some way if scripture's twisted in that direction, among many other ways. And there are a lot of real-life stories of people who have been damaged by the church when it comes to topics of abuse. For example, there's a guy named Jim who tried to basically turn his wife into a prostitute. And eventually, they were both going to church the whole time, but eventually the wife started to explain to the church that this is what's happening to her, and the church didn't know how to respond. They didn't take her seriously, and they just encouraged her to be loyal to her husband, which was the last advice that she should have been given. There was a prominent Christian pastor and professor in one community who had made 3 separate attempts to kill his wife, and on the 3rd occasion left her for dead in the woods. She miraculously survived, and she filed for divorce, and the church condemned her for getting divorced, and then told her that she should have never revealed the abuse in the first place. She's damaging the character of the guy that everybody knows. Anne Marie left her abusive husband and then received a call from the pastor of a church that she used to go to months later, and she's like, oh, great, they're going to tell me, like, we're so glad that you got out of that. She shows up, finds out the pastor has talked to her former husband and is on his side and is trying to get her to come back and forgive. And he berates her over it. These are just 3 of the stories of ways in which the church has handled abuse. And they're 3 of a large group of horror stories within the church and how we get into this topic. And I realize that part of the reason we act like this is because of Jesus' teachings. It's the teaching that we get into today as we start our message. No, just kidding. Jesus gave one of his impassioned, really strong messages in the Sermon on the Mount on divorce. And he said, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. An older version of myself came down really hard on this passage. The first time that I kind of encountered divorce, I did not respond right. And to be fair, this one wasn't around abuse. But I came in really, really hard on Jesus' teachings. After a couple confessed to me what they were, that they were going to break up, I just came in and said, no, this is wrong. Can't do that. And I laid into them. And I thought I was following Jesus in those moments. And I kept praying. Like, as soon as I left, I was like, I really want to text them and say, sorry, that was harsh. But also, I feel like I got to just leave them with Jesus. And so I'm just going to leave it there. And I'm just going to keep praying, God, if you want to convict me, convict me. And months go by, and I'm still praying this prayer because I hate my stomach is unsettled from that situation and how I acted. But I wanted to be biblical. I wanted to follow Jesus, you know. And Jesus said it intensely, so I was saying it intensely. And time went by, and I wasn't getting any word or anything that I was supposed to do anything about it until one day I yelled at my son. I had not slept for 2 days because I got too caught up in a passion project recording an album. And I mastered it all night and then exported it, drove my car around, listening to the whole thing, making sure it was right before I hit that publish button. And I was exhausted. My son would not go to bed, and I just exploded. He was playing in the closet, and we had told him to go to bed many times, and I just yelled, Beckett, get in bed. And I was so angry in that moment. Like I left the room. I laid down in my bed, and I just closed my eyes and imagined Jesus. And I was suddenly in a space, in a visionary space that I had never been before. It's kind of like a greenhouse, but the whole thing was apocalyptic, like it was falling apart, wasn't very healthy, and it just felt surreal in that moment. When I asked Jesus, I was like, where am I right now? It's like, it's the garden of your mind. And at that time, I had been writing a book called The Taste of Jesus, which was about the different fruit of the Spirit. And I realized that there were different kind of like displays. Here's the display of the fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. And it all, like some of them were healthier than others, and some of them were strong roots but had yet to produce any fruit. But along this kind of vision, I just brought up out of nowhere, I was like, the way that I talked to those people when they were getting divorced, did I do the right thing? And this next part made me weep. And it's going to sound harsh, but when it comes from Jesus, like it just convicts. It didn't feel condemning, like it was gentle enough that I could receive it. But I just felt him say, how could you? There's no fruit here. And I just started weeping in bed. I thought I had done the biblical responsibility to step into a conversation on divorce with somebody when I came down hard trying to promote the way that Jesus was teaching. But I had not done it with the fruit of Jesus. And so I came out of that moment. Of course, I emailed these people, apologized, had meetings with them both, and repented. And as I've sat with these for a while and tried to understand like how to process them, I've learned things about situations like abuse. And as I know the fruit of Jesus, I know that there's no way Jesus would look at somebody living in these really crazy abusive situations and just be like, no divorce, not unless there's sexual immorality. Because Jesus is not giving like a very detailed example as to how divorce works. He's speaking on a hot topic of his time, and he's just saying it straight so that people hear it. Because in his time, people got divorced for anything and everything. And there were a lot of different teachings. There were some rabbis who said you could only get divorced on the grounds of sexual immorality. And then there were other rabbis who said, if your spouse made you a sandwich you didn't like, you can get divorced. Now, that's not really an overstatement. There's actually these kinds of teachings. And so when Jesus steps into that situation, he's recognizing you're supposed to take care of each other. And he's speaking to a culture that is highly patriarchal. That is to say that women could not get divorced. Only men could divorce. And so you had all these men divorcing their spouses and basically abandoning them. They had no more support. They had no more help. In their society, they were just kind of thrown to the wayside. And so when Jesus comes in on this, he's like, no more of that. Unless there's like sexual immorality, you are with your spouse and you will take care of them. Jesus is not talking on all the other kinds of issues that can go into divorce, though. There are many situations where things are just too broken. And it's hard to be the judge of what situation's what. Because when we're broken, it's hard to see the possibility of any light. And so we recognize that when people are going through divorce, it's just our time to come alongside them and help them. Because there's no such thing as an easy divorce. There's a time to support and love and care for. So last week's passage, remember, Jesus recognizes that in particular he's speaking to men, like men are lusting after women, treating them inappropriately, turning them into objects. So Jesus is very feminist in his approach to protecting women from lustful men. And then in today's passage, the immediate next statement, Jesus comes alongside and is supporting women who are being divorced and tossed to the wayside, not letting men just get out of their relationships because they didn't like this, that, or the other thing, but reminding them that they are one and that they have been brought together. So, this conversation gets messy. The Bible, as it ends up, is not like a full rule book as how to follow all the fine details. But when we recognize the details of things like abusive situations, again, we know that Jesus is not like, just go with it, just stay with it, just hold through it. No, that's not how Jesus would talk. And so in every situation that we face, and this is true of any issue in life, we come to Jesus and we ask for help. And this is the same Jesus, mind you, who comes up to a woman who's been divorced 5 times and looks at her with deep compassion and love. Because as Amity's pointed out to me many times, this has changed that passage for me forever. Remember, that woman could not choose to get divorced. 5 times in a row, men had decided to toss her to the wayside. And the person she's with right now is not even her husband. It may just be that she's trying to support her life to get by. And Jesus comes up to her with compassion and love and does not say anything judgmental to her at all. It's helpful, too, to remember, though we don't say it often, in the Old Testament, God got divorced. So at least 3 prophetic passages where God has faced abuse from his spouse. Time and time again, they have been unfaithful. They have given themselves to other gods over and over again. They've slept around. They have done all the things that broke the marriage covenant. So at least 3 times in the Old Testament, God himself is like, this abusive relationship is hurting me, and I have to step away. Now, in the grand scheme of things, he comes back for a remnant of his bride, because it's metaphor. But he's coming back for a remnant who is faithful to him. He's coming back for the bride that will be perfect, that will listen to him, that will live the way that they were always supposed to live and chase after him. And he is patient and loving toward us. Well, let's do our best as we are pursuing our relationship with Christ to make it one of passion, like we talked about earlier. Make it a true marriage. Let us make sure that in our own Christianity, our own relationship with Christ, that we don't become an abuser in the situation, only ever taking from Jesus and never giving back, only ever coming to him when it's beneficial to us and then not following him outside of that. So Jesus, we come before you right now. We recognize that this is a heavy topic. It is hard to wrap our minds, for those of us who have not seen abuse up close, it's hard to wrap our minds around it because it's just so foreign to what we've experienced. And because it's hidden so well, it's hard to imagine. But God, give us eyes for those around us who are hurting. Help us to love those who have dealt with, are dealing with, or will deal with divorce. Help us not to abuse, and help those of us who are dealing with abuse to find the way out. And help us still live into your words here, because when you did choose to speak strongly, you try to teach us the ways of love and faithfulness. But we recognize that it takes two to tango in a relationship. We need help dealing with the times where only one is doing the tango. Help everybody, just like last week. Everybody will hear this message in a different way because it's all different situations for all of us. Jesus, do not let us hear this in any way other than the way that you need us to hear it, specifically to our life. This is not some message to make anybody who feels like they've faced something difficult to now have freedom to run away. Help us as we chase after you and look at the vice of others, that we might find health in our marriages and our families. We love you and ask for your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen.
Green.